Hello, everyone, and welcome to this book launch. I'm Emily Pierini, co-editor with Alberto Groisman and Espírito Santo of the volume Other Worlds, Other Bodies, Embodied Epistemologies and Ethnographies of Healing, recently published by Berghahn. So thank you for being here with us for this book launch, and also wish to thank my co-editors, our contributors. Some of them are online, some in person, and Berghahn for sharing this journey towards the comprehension of this volume. This volume is a fruitful outcome of an ongoing dialogue that began with Alberto and Diana through the several events that we have organized through the Hill Network for the Ethnography of Healing. In particular, the EASA 2020 conference panel, Other Worlds, Other Bodies. And the key question that have inspired us in those events and in this volume, the key question is, as ethnographer in the field of healing, how can we productively assess and discuss our bodily experience in terms of ethnographic knowledge, of the knowledge that we produce in our ethnographies? While the notions of the body permeate studies on healing, and anthropology is witnessing the so-called affective turn, we felt that a critical view upon the bodily experience of the ethnographer, and so a more substantial and contemporary reflection upon our own epistemologies of the body, was needed for this particular field of the study of healing. Even though we acknowledge the contribution of the works by Jean-Febvre Sada, Paul Stoller, Robert de Jarlet, Edith Werner, among others. In particular, Alberto Groisman has proposed in his section of the introduction that we need to reflect upon the conditioning and deconditioning of our bodies, respectively by academia and in the field. We therefore invited our colleagues to think through their experiences of healing, trance, possession, shamanism, participation in healing rituals in the field through the analytical category that we propose, that is epistemological embodiment. And so this notion of epistemological embodiment signals that a personal scholarly experience of the unknown shapes the concepts of healing, of the body, the self, trance, and matter by which we craft out analysis. This book is organized in 3 sections, paradoxes and dilemmas, transitions and transformations, and engagements. While these sections might suggest different gradients of participation, ranging from transition to deeper engagements, they do not wish to suggest, nor to exclude, a conversion or an initiation into a religious practice. But they feature a critical attention to the ethnographer's embodied modes of knowing in the field. Participation is hereby assessed as one of the main methods of ethnography, moving away from the critical assumptions of the risk of going native. Especially, as I also argue in my chapter, we need to acknowledge that among participants of spiritual healing practices, there is no homogeneous category of native, as participants might have different backgrounds informing their experiences. And so all experiences are subject to a critical analysis that consider different embodied epistemologies. So what does affect move for ethnographers and participants in ritual healing? This is the question that we ask. And our authors have explored the potential shared imagery and imaginal revelations, as much as methodological playfulness, paradoxes, affect and attunement when engaging in ritual participation. Along with participants in ritual healing, profound transformative experiences may also occur to the ethnographer. While they might not necessarily lead to a belief, they may trigger a flip in the research process in itself, bringing along unique insights or dilemmas that inform field relations and ethnographic knowledge. In this sense, transformative means to form through a process or to give a shape, but it might also be understood as to learn through something. For this reason, putting these experiences under scrutiny rather than breaking them out may illuminate the processual, pedagogical, and epistemological aspects of healing. And now, since my co-editors, Alberto and Diana, could not be with us today, they sent their video presentation to share their thoughts on the production and contribution of this volume. So I'm going to now share Alberto's video.
Hello everyone. I'm speaking from Brazil to first thank who collaborate with us, especially in the field, and to everyone who agreed to share writing or reading this book and talked about it. And writing in our case means choosing words and converting life into text, which is our craft. And this talk here is a translation. So translating is a complex task, Mika, which we sometimes simplify. I remember that the sharp and gentle Steve Nugent in our conversations about my thesis. He once said to me, "Your English is reasonable. Sometimes you even express complex things," as if to say, you are not ready. Not only do I not fully know if I can express complex things in English, but I know how complex it is not to be sure that the other person fully understands what we want to express. But anyway, we take risks in life. Books are seen as inanimate objects, but in editing this book, it occurred to me that what we have in our hands today is a way of materializing years of conversation, exchange, convergence, divergence. A book, yes, is a living thing. In fact, my relationships with the academic publishing market has always been somewhat challenging. And in the experience I've had with this collection, I've been able to better understand what the market makes us do. And that sometimes causes strangeness. But anyway, could it be a sort of cultural conditioning? Probably not. But several times it occurred to me to write an ethnographic text about this academic right, which is publishing. I think it's more than time for us to think about our own practice. In 2018, in the organization of the event that gave rise to this book, as well as in its introduction, it appears to me that this is time of trance, of anthropology, as well as transition in and between the worlds in which we live. Worlds where new ways of relating and communicating are invented every day. The best thing to do is to be attentive and strong in front of all the transformations. So learning, sharing, tensing relationships transforms bodies. That's the idea to think. What we invent unfolds in how we do it, and what do unfolds what we have to invent. I have tried to think of the textuality of knowledge, and particularly ethnography, as a way of trying to bring to life the beings, animate or inanimate, life subjects and places that we approach and where we circulate in our lived experience. So when I thought of the title of my book, of my part of the book, I realized that what I wanted was to demystify the idea that the others, the mystics, the savages, the natives go into trances. Even if they omit it or even hide it in their writings, ethnographers go into trances in the field. At least the trance that distinguishes the normal from the extraordinary. And since everything is transformed, it is in this oceanic sensation of trance, of transitivity, that the book, and at least as far as I'm concerned, encourages us to think about other worlds. And our bodies aren't the same either. We incorporate what we experience in one way or another. What we think is inside us and what we think is in the cosmos. So what I can say here is that we are living and thinking not only but especially about contemporary anthropological bodies, particularly what they us have to deal with, and with whom they have to negotiate existence, perhaps to expand horizons. If about models of anthropology, I can think of any more consistent experience than those of the populations who live barefoot, without conventional mediations. So I've been thinking about the possibility of a bare feet anthropology. Is it possible? Thank you.
And now we will see Diana's presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry that I can't attend the conference. I want to thank Emily for the opportunity to send in this short video from Chile. In this book, Other Worlds, Other Bodies, we ask a series of questions, including, could we argue that a phenomenological method of participatory observation, for example, experiencing spirit possession or healing oneself, could provide critical anthropological insight into the nature of spirit experience and healing? And what are the implications of these experiences for our own concepts, theories, and ideas? What does this interface become? But this also presupposes something else, that what we might call extraordinary experiences, whether spontaneous healing, spirit mediumship, or extraterrestrial visitations, are in fact ordinary for most people. This is a particular trope in motion, in action, ordinary cosmologies in encounter with extraordinary anthropological assumptions embodied in researchers. This means that we need to think and feel through otherness with embodied understandings or images or metaphors that open rather than close or resolve inquiry. These methods resist a final answer, a call for objectivity, or a totalizing conclusion. Instead, they adopt what we have termed embodied epistemology in an effort to reject the separation between epistemology and ontology and between experience and concept and theory. But there are caveats. Firstly, embodiment is not the same everywhere. Therefore, we also need to reconceptualize what we mean by embodied experience, especially in contexts where both ethnographer and interlocutor have different bodies, biographies, and ontogeneses. We might argue with Matthias van der Poort that there's always something, especially in spirit-related cosmologies, that refuses signification, conceptualization, and description. The real, he says, quoting Zizek, is something that persists only as failed, estranged, in a shadow, and dissolves as soon as we try to grasp it in its positive nature. The real is paradoxical, and as anthropologists, we would probably be arrogant if we insisted on representing it. Secondly, what then happens with the not known, or the ambiguous, or the absurd, or the not conceptualizable in our analysis? How can anthropology come to terms with what is not said, not known, in the dark, or even with what both is and is not? Anthropology does not do well with paradoxical states. What is not known is taken in exactly this sense, as ontologically extractive, an absence to be added to later, namely, filled to fuller knowledge. Recently published edited volume has attempted to grapple with peripheral spaces, positing their generativity for social theory, for methodology. Martinez, Fredrickson, and Pupo argue that their book, Peripheral Methodologies, explores the ways in which the, I quote, the unarticulated, the edgy, and the unknown can be considered a form of thinking about problems, questions, and evidence, which also entails reflecting upon what it means to be on the periphery. They ask, what if we resist the urge to extract meaning and assemble fragments into a whole? Vulnerability, feeling lost, not knowing, and staying in the in-between allows creativity, allows for finding languages to, I quote, write the incomplete or invisible. What if gathering data were about the preservation of suspension and surprise, the embrace of not knowing, or indeed unlearning, magnifying our awareness of the outer limits of what remains unknown? In his work, Paul Stoller reiterates that enormously powerful states that people in the liminal space experience are extremely generative. These are sometimes permanent spaces, states without resolution, he says. Stoller, as we all know, is a prolific anthropologist who has written in a series of forms, including biographical and memoir, and even fiction. He's also undergone a process of sorcery apprenticeship. What this middle space does, according to him, is offer access to imagination, creativity, and empowerment. Stoller tells us an experience he had of, quote, not knowing your backside from your front side, when he was awoken in the middle of the night at his main interlocutor's house with what seemed to be footsteps and high-pitched screeching, followed by scratching on the corrugated tin door. His interlocutor's son later told him that he had heard the guardians of the bush. His advice was that to understand the bush, you need to surrender to it and let it penetrate your being, a transformative process fraught with personal risk and existential vulnerability. Stoller's response to this, to his own encounter with non-knowledge, or the absurd, as an anthropologist, is to remain between art and ethnography, to evoke the remedy of art, to tell a good story while acknowledging not knowing, unlearning, and the absence of knowledge. Stoller's peripheral experience is not unique. Arguably, our ethnographic evidence is full of such tales, where caution is nullified and meaning stunted for us anthropologists, leading to other experiential and fieldwork formats. So I guess what I'm suggesting here is that apart from understanding and deconstructing how we, the researchers, embody epistemology, we also look at instances where there is an impossibility of communication, where there's a dearth of knowledge, or where epistemological embodiment simply doesn't work. In my opinion, this dark or paradoxical aspect of ethnography is extremely productive. And perhaps we may have to look outside of anthropology to find some analytical answers. Thank you, and I wish you all a great conference.
Now I invite Giovanna Capponi, wrote chapter 1, Playing with Other Worlds, Renegotiating Bodily Experience and Hierarchy in Afro-Brazilian Candomblé.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Giovanna Capponi. Thank you very much, Emily, for inviting me to just share a few thoughts on my chapter, and thank you for providing such a great and complex theoretical framework, which is very hard to summarize, given the fact we've been working and dialoguing on that for so many years. So my work belongs to the section of dilemmas and paradoxes, and it's actually what I went through my work. I was doing research, it was my PhD research on the relationship between Candomblé, Afro-Brazilian Candomblé practitioners and elements of nature and landscape and animals. But I soon realized what I meant as an outsider, let's say, for ecology wasn't exactly what my interlocutors meant. In fact, Candomblé ecology was omnicomprehensive, not only of animals, plants, humans, but also invisible beings, spirits of the dead, deities. And therefore, I was compelled to take into account these different ontologies and these spirit ontologies and these new ways of looking at biodiversity, in a sense. However, how can we look at different ontologies and not at different perceptions? I try to engage with what Rogers called methodological ludism, which means playing, cultivating openness, playing with the possibility of the existence of other worlds. And this play proved to be very fruitful, but also very problematic, especially since with my own bodily engagement, I started experiencing, feeling the presence of these invisible and more than human beings. Therefore, the play started being very very serious, not only because I started feeling and experiencing what, like in pathological terms, would be the symptoms of trance possession and orisha possession, but also because this meant not only asking myself questions on my own engagement and involvement, but also being reframed in terms of power relations within the academia on the one hand, and in the field on the other hand. In fact, historically, the academia has been using the ethnographers' bodily engagement to delegitimize their works, saying they were too involved and not objective enough. At the same time, candomblé practitioners have used the ethnographer's bodily experience and exposure to legitimize their power as healer or religious authorities. So by taking into account these two dilemmas, like the ethnographer's perspective and experience, but also the power relationship this entail, I try to understand how can we renegotiate our bodily presence and engagement, both within the academia and the field. And that was it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giovanna. And then we have Géraldine Moussier. She wrote Chapter 2, Embodied Knowledge and the Phenomenological Poster to frame the anthropology of extraordinary experiences.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you for the editors. Thank you to the editors for gathering this wonderful book, to which I'm delighted to be part of. And thank you also for the very sophisticated presentation of the epistemological context of the book. My piece actually starts with the issue of the narratives of extraordinary experiences that anthropologists may collect on the fieldwork. And by extraordinary, I mean experiences that go beyond the realm of the intellectual, secular, and rational lenses. So, for example, narratives of miracle healing or prophetic dreams. So the question I raise is not so much about what meaning we as anthropologists should give to those experiences that appear at first hand to be beyond the reach of rational explanation, but how to grasp and report them. So would these accounts have more empirical legitimacy if the ethnographer lived and reported similar experiences himself or herself? So in my piece, I explore subtle levels of participation that vary on a continuum between two poles, namely on one hand, a distant dialogue between the ethnographer and what has often been portrayed as otherness. And this is what I experienced when I followed women who decided to embrace Islam. But on the other hand of the spectrum, I explored the phenomenological experience of co-presence, which is what occurred on my fieldwork with African Pentecostals, and which is also the topic of the piece. So I discussed this level of participation and how they frame the construction of knowledge by examining different ways of sharing extraordinary experience. And to do that, I build on Johannes Fabian's idea of co-presence, that is a dialogical process of co-construction of knowledge with a phenomenological premise. So for this, I draw on the ethnographic study that I have conducted among Congolese Pentecostal ritual congregations to suggest that a phenomenological perspective that puts senses, emotions, and affect at the core of embodied knowledge may be the only feasible approach for grasping unexplainable experience, with emotions being considered as embodied thoughts, to follow Renato Rosaldo ID. So as a matter of fact, experiencing fieldwork influences bodily sensations and perceptions in a way that may create pre-logical knowledge, that is knowledge prior to being attributed conventional meaning. So over the course of my fieldwork in Congolese churches, as I regularly attended Sunday services, I gradually became more deeply involved in the hymns, the dances, the melodies, the speeches, and started to feel intimately touched by the strong emotions that were evoked during and catalyzed during the rituals. So I had the opportunity to experience how rituals articulate emotions, as well as imagination, memory, perception, and senses, with the various dimensions of this mindful body that is prone to facilitate personal holistic transformation of the self that the Pentecostals see as healing experiences. So this, however, raises the question of the extent to which the anthropologist's attention to embodiment may inform his or her understanding of the other's experience, which brings the issue of intersubjectivity in the conversation, as well as the definition and boundaries of the self and in relationship with the other on fieldwork. So again, on my fieldwork among Pentecostals, I embraced an empathic position that seemed to me to be the only way to grasp the embodied dimensions of religious behavior. For example, I shared with the Pentecostal believers the emotions that the music, songs, dances trigger for them, including the recall of their personal chaotic past that could also echo my own migratory past to some extent. So I argue here that empathy and Einfühlung, that means in the sense of feeling as one, as an ethnographic method, frame an ongoing conversation fraught with differentiation as well as entanglement of the self and on the other, which are produced in shared practices and activities. This perspective where, as Grindal puts it, reality is relative to one's consciousness of it, opens new avenues for the construction of knowledge, where one can imagine that the ethnographer's experience may ultimately become his or her own informant. So this, of course, raises the issue of the relevance of the ethnographer's experience as compared to the informants. Here, in a way, the anthropologist is supposed to reach for a phenomenological perspective on his own or her own experience, as well as to negotiate his or her participation during fieldwork. So as a conclusion, I would say that this piece discusses how ethnographic fieldwork may generate other types of knowledge and put forth the distinction between communicable knowledge that is informative and kinds of knowledge only learned through tacit experience that is formative knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Bettina Schmidt. Chapter 3, Living with Spirits, Spirituality and Health in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Yeah, thank you very much, Emily, for organizing this wonderful book launch. And also big thanks to Diana, Alberto, and you for including me in this wonderful book. And so I think this will be one of the standard textbooks in particular for anthropology of religion in the future. It is a wonderful collection of articles. I think quite good. I'm included in part 1, Paradox in Dilemmas. And my article is also about 2 different types of tensions. In the one side, the story I'm narrating, then the story about the Matteo, whom I call Matteo in my article, was kind of a side product or part of an investigation of a research I conducted in Brazil about the tension between people who are spiritual or religious and people who work in medical contexts as nurses, doctors, therapists, psychologists, and so on. And I ask them first, what is the importance of spirituality for well-being? And then I try to flesh it out. What do they mean? And what they discuss it also in the work environment and so on. Then afterwards, I did a couple of follow-up interviews, and one of the interviews several interviews were with people who were patients in the medical system for various different reasons, who identified as spiritual or religious, and I wanted to find out how they brought this and how they encountered it in a medical context. And Matteo's story was one a very rich story, and he had a lot of different medical problems, and he encountered this this problem where he was diagnosed with a heart problem, had to go surgery, and was afraid, didn't want to do it, and consulted the spirits, consulted people in his spiritual center, but then found a surgeon, a heart surgeon, who was also a spiritist. And suddenly he felt relieved and felt supported and recovered really quickly from his ordeal. And so I thought this is quite a rich story to show that the tensions between two different worldviews is really not important. Important is the connections between people. However, it's also about our own positions as an anthropologist in the field. And here I encountered the second type of tensions. I'm trained in cultural anthropology in Germany quite traditionally, being told again and again, it's about the other, dialogue with the other, and we have to speak about the other. We have to find their views and then translate it to our readership. And this is what I've done for years and years and years in doing my ethnographic research. However, it's more than that. We are also human, and we are bringing us also in our field work. And this is what the second part of my article discusses. My encounter in the spiritual center. Matteo took me after a long conversation, and I went through a passe, which is a spiritual energy session, and so it's doesn't mean that the body is not touched, but energy is like kind of cleansed, and I've had suddenly realized that my body responded to the situation. And so in the second part of the article, therefore, I reflect about how this realization a couple of hours afterwards, when I realized that this happened, showed me a different type of and gave me a different type of access to knowledge and information. And hopefully in my future research, I can go a bit further and can discover this more and more. And so my aim is to attend more spiritual healing sessions in the future when I have the time and the support to do research again, and to discover a little bit more how my body responds in these situations. And this is it for me. And so thank you to everyone for your attention. And if you have any comments or recommendation, I'm open, and I hope that you will contact me and tell me more what you found out after reading this wonderful book. Thank you.
Thank you, Bettina. In chapter 4, the ghosts that haunt me, feeling with emphatic technologies and doing ethnographies about spirit possession in contemporary Japan, Andrea and Antonio approaches exorcism rituals in the Kami shrine in Japan as effective technologies. He argues that access to spirit ontologies is possible if the ethnographer attunes to and feel with the effective technologies and with others in the field, including spirits. He described the undergoing rituals with a Japanese priest twice, and how his experience differed by shifting somatic attention. While the first ritual, he paid attention to the formal aspects of the ritual, resulting in a detachment from the action. In the second session, the Antoni began attuning his posture and attention to what the others did, eliciting a set of bodily responses and feelings similar to what his interlocutors had described to him. And now I invite Paula Bronson. She wrote chapter 5, Try Feeding the Ghost More, an illness, experience, and understanding the unseen in a Tamang village in Nepal.
It's nice to be here. It's nice to be here in person. And again, I echo the previous contributors' thanks to Emily and our other editors, Diana and Alberto. This was quite a journey for me. I just come back from the field. I'm still writing up my doctoral research, so this is my first publication. So it was quite a journey for me. So I'll just speak briefly, kind of off the cuff. I haven't prepared anything. Again, this was an illness journey of my own. And so this opportunity to write this also was processing some of these kind of returning to health and coming back from a year in rural Nepal. So I'm a physiotherapist by training. So my research methodology was a clinical ethnography. So I was living in a very remote village and hoping to meet people who were experiencing and living every day with chronic musculoskeletal pain. Now, it wasn't hard to find people, certainly, but to my surprise, I was connected with the local, very remote outpost. It was a non-government organization, hospital. But to my delight and unexpected, as these things happen in field work, people didn't visit the biomedical clinic. They went to see the bombos, who are the traditional healers. And you'll learn more about them in tomorrow's presentation. And I, again, serendipitously was living with kind of the main group of bombo families. Again, I didn't plan any of this. And so what I found is that I wasn't feeling well. And when this opportunity came up, it really started these processes of how I, maybe not even intentionally, began to seek the care of the bombos, because that's what I was living with, and my host family suggested this. And then I began to see how this really opened up my opportunities to understanding. And I center it around the themes mainly of fear and vulnerability. And this is what we see in chronic illness. This is inherent in it. It will probably never go away. And you have to live with that. And beginning to learn that it will never go away, the anxiety that produces, and the health-seeking behavior, be it traditional or biomedical. So this chapter focuses around an interlocutor who I call Pasang, and I introduce him tomorrow as well, who understanding within this context in this district in Nepal, there was, I would say 95% of the village had been decimated. Surprisingly, the stupa was the only remaining one, which is the Buddhist Chorten. And so many people were still suffering at different levels, economically and psychically and psychologically. So this man, middle-aged man, had the roof had fallen on him, and he had broken his leg. And so this is 5 years later, and he was suffering with everyday pain. But on top of that, and something that was more pervasive and more troubling, was his soul loss, what he calls hungsa. And I'll explain that a little bit more tomorrow in terms of the different levels of their understanding of soul. And so I did attend his healing rituals, but what I saw more than anything, what I found, what one of my central questions is why was it you? Why did the ghost come and take your soul? Why not your neighbors? What was going on? And because of his physical disabilities, and he was quite, in terms of, difficulty walking, quite physically dysfunctional, but also physically quite a we call it kyphosis, around its spine. He was very stigmatized in the village, so he was vulnerable. His wife also suffered with psychiatric problems. He says it's because I'm weak. And this fear, when he saw a friend die, probably from a heart attack in the road, this is when the ghost came and took his soul. So I really started to understand some of, again, we're very different people, and looking again at our embodied knowledge as ethnographers, we're certainly not saying that we understand or even can feel their pain, but I think that strong emotion of me being ill for 8 months straight, and it was a common giardia, but again, you know, the difficulty in accessing good food and water, clean water was, you know, as Davide knows, in Nepal is not possible always. So I really began to understand these themes, and also just in understanding the practice and what I was doing. I began to say, this is what I've been doing in physiotherapy for so many years, and this embodied understanding and learning of not only my practice as a physiotherapist, but understanding some of these underlying ways of being vulnerable, and how once my chapter is called Try Feeding the Ghost. So what that relates to is when I did see a bombo, he was just matter of fact, there's a ghost coming around you and he's hungry, just feed him. You know, it's like, okay. Once I could name that and have that validated, it was almost the relief of being, you know, understanding it was giardia. It was like, now I feel this anxiety is gone. So kind of looking at the anthropologist Jean Jackson, who we discussed earlier, the validation and legitimization of chronicity is so important. And how does this, again, this isn't different in terms of a biomedical understanding or a traditional way of understanding, and how having access to that validation and relief of anxiety can lead to someone's healing. So, okay, great.
Chapter 6 by Eugenia Rousseau and Anastasis Panagiotopoulous, Encountering Other Worlds Through Trans-Religiosity, a Comparative Account of Healing, Embodiment, and Transformation in the Field.
Thank you, Emily. Giovanna, did you want to say anything because you had your hand raised? Ah, no, I saw the, okay, sorry. Well, thank you, Emily, and also thanks to the co-editors, Alberto and Diana. And thank you all for being here, physically or virtually. Our chapter is authored by two, so we try to match two ethnographic contexts, which we thought, apart from the differences, also had some interesting similarities. So Eugenius Rousseau's ethnographic presentation takes place in Greece, but through a healer who has doing some passes, who has learned to do some spiritist passes from a Brazilian person who was in contact. And my context is Spain, but also some Afro-Cuban healers in Spain, and myself. So both presentations in the chapter are also auto-ethnographic. We are experimented also with being quite auto-ethnographic and comparing the experiences of our interlocutors with ourselves. And we were trying also, this is now part of a research project, me and Eugenia are organizing, which is a notion, the concept of trans-religiosity, And very briefly, we describe it as the transgression of borders, not only among different religious or spiritual practices, but also of what is conventionally, or let's say in a given context, considered to be religious and what not. And this concept we are playing still well. Now it's a project with this concept of trans-religiosity. And what I found, I mean, interesting in both contexts, well, Greece and Spain, you could argue it's a very similar context, Southern Europe, and the more socio-political context of crisis in the latest years, but also in the experiences of healing crisis, healing crisis, and moments of vulnerability, which I think in a way made that possible for us to compare and do some auto-ethnography in the sense that these moments of crisis, of vulnerability, also point to the fact that we don't necessarily deal with a constant cultural established experience, but also there was a discussion before an unofficial discussion among Bettina and I don't remember who else, I think Geraldine, about miracles, you know, not something necessarily culturally established, but miracles which surprise you, something surprising, not something expected, that plays a very important role, both in our auto-ethnographic experiences in the field and our interlocutors. It doesn't mean that necessarily all our interlocutors are the healers. If you focus on the patients, let's say, then the audience is much more broad. And these moments of unexpected moments are very significant, even though they might not be the majority or the norm, even within their own experiences. And I would like to make some points, they're my own points, not necessarily Eugenia's, but I find interesting that dealing with the body and the senses, maybe conventionally in the Western, let's say, thought, we take them as the source of diversity and multiplicity. But here, when we're playing with ourselves and the ethnographic context, the body was a kind of a source of understanding of unity, let's say, of understanding common experiences, which might be extraordinary as well. Spirits might be involved, but dealing with the effects, and because they are highly therapeutic, the context we were dealing with, the effects of healing or the afflictions are not a source of diversity, but the contrary. And that's one point that I would like to say. And just trying to make sense of a broader context, what, at least in Spain, Greece, Western world, meeting, let's say, non-Western ways of healing. I would just like to raise a concern not to over-fetishize openness, diversity. We tend to do that, and I don't think it's a bad thing. But sometimes the context itself understands diversity and openness and instability as something negative, not necessarily positive. So we also analytically should be at least sensitive to that and not rush into arguing that openness and diversity is necessarily a positive thing, because if the context itself implies that openness and diversity is the problem, part of the affliction, then we should also take this into consideration. And that's it.
Thank you. In chapter 7, Learning to Trance, the effective grounding of becoming another body in another place, Tamara Di Torne describes her participation in a Sufi ritual of healing that draws upon the musical cultivation of trance. She argues that learning trance, so how to move through embodied mimesis, how to feel through the body motion and intercorporeality, has certainly provided a means to connect with their interlocutors and compare their experiences, highlighting the differences and nuances and the gradients of control involved in every trance experience. It also illuminated the ability of the body to grasp knowledge that is not accessible to the rest of the self. And now in part 3, engagement, there's my chapter 8, ways of knowing and healing, mediumistic and ethnographic epiphanies in the Valle do Amanhecer, in which I analyzed my own bodily pains in the field. It was in particular abdominal pain that led me to undergo a ritual of healing with a spirit medium in the Temple of the Valle do Amanhecer in Brazil, followed by a medical assistance in a clinic in the city in Brasilia. Basically, I went through this ritual and had this bodily pain, which appeared just after participating in another ritual. And the spirit told me, the spirit guide, this Preta Veglia, that a spirit came through across my body. She used the word cross my body, but it was released and it left some residues in my body. And that I was fine. I needed to drink fluidified water. And then seek a doctor of the earth, like medical assistance. So after the day after, I went to the clinic in Brasilia, did all the relevant exams, and then the doctor came in, and the interesting feature was that he had this badge, and it was called Dr. Ralph, and Dr. Ralph is the name of a spirit guide of a doctor in the rituals of the Valle do Amanhecer. And he said, well, there's nothing here, nothing resulted from the exams, and I think it was just a virus that crossed your body and now it's gone, just drink a lot of water. So both experience with the medium and the doctor had mobilized different and interrelated concepts, such as invisible entities and residues that move through, in and out of the body, may they be spirits of viruses, cleansing fluids, like drink a lot of water, and the psychology of substances. And I refer to a particular kind of knowledge that is suddenly emerging from body experience in terms of epiphany as an entanglement between insight, skill, and craft. And I also examine the potential of using these experiences comparatively with those of mediums to build a common ground in our research endeavors. Chapter 9 by Gustavo Ruiz Chiesa, Learning to Read the World, Education of Attention and Parapsychic Perception of the Environment, examines a phenomenon of shared intersubjectivities among participants in the session of Ectolab in Brazil. Ectolab is a laboratory research, a team of scientists researching the effects of ectoplasm on health and well-being. And he described how he became affected and entangled in a web of beings and energies, having experiences of shared imagery with other people, reporting, seeing the same scene he visualized during the session with other participants in the session. So he claims that his experience prompted a different understanding of his interlocutors' narratives. And staying in Brazil, chapter 10 by Helmar Course, Sensory Ethnography and Anthropology of Mediumship, exploring Brazilian spiritist practices in mental well-being and healthcare in Brazil. Helmar, do you want to present it?
Yes, thank you, Emily. And thank you all my colleagues that you have already raised many theoretical questions and approaches. So I'm going to kind of like keep it low, not going too much into theoretical approaches, but more on my experience that I kind of like reflect in my article. So coming from a background of medical anthropology, anthropology of religion, and transcultural psychiatry, I was mainly wondering how maybe complementary or alternative concepts of mental health care could work in different places of the world. And having already studied Candomblé and Umbanda in Brazil, and then at some point learning about the very particular example of a spiritist psychiatry that you have in Brazil, I was wondering, so what do they do there? So I had three questions in mind. One was kind of like what Thomas Shorters yesterday already mentioned. How are ideas transnationally, translocally, transculturally communicated and reproduced? Another question was, how do maybe like religious actors and medical actors, psychiatrists work together in terms of healing cooperation? I will talk about this tomorrow morning, how that works out. But the third question was, what drives people to kind of like participate in Brazilian spiritist practices of healthcare or mental health care? And I kind of like try to frame that, what I call the aesthetics of healing, kind of like wanting to find out what are sensory elements, sensory aspects of practices over there that I try to investigate by participant observation, by narrative interviews, qualitative interviews. It just happened that many people related to mediumship, practices of mediumship, ideas of spirits afflicting human beings, as we listened a lot through this Congress already in terms of health. So I had to participate in mediumship sessions. And it happened to be that I had weird encounters throughout the sessions, feeling things that was clear was not mine, or something that I didn't feel in myself before. Like certain emotions that suddenly came up, that I want to throw a chair through the room. And briefly after, a medium would incorporate a spirit that was very angry. Or I would sit in a mediumship session and suddenly started to bawl in tears, crying, not knowing what I was crying of, but I was very sad. And briefly after, a spirit would incorporate, a medium would incorporate a spirit that was very sad, and so on. So I had very, very intense encounters and experiences throughout my research. And I was starting to wonder, can I use that as data? And this is kind of like what I focus in my article about. Like, can I use my sensory experiences, my emotional states throughout research? Can I use it as data? And of course, there have been a lot of research by people like Davis and Spencer, or Sarah Pink, or others that reflect on that. But I try to really bring it together in my research, that after I have these experiences, and then in the next step, talk with my interlocutors about that. And then they kind of like respond yeah, you're kind of like feeling the things we are feeling also. That I can kind of like take it as data. It's of course not that what I experience, I can take it as data, as real. But after discussing with my interlocutors and seeing, okay, we have kind of like similar experiences, that I come to the conclusion, okay, that's funny, because I always thought that these experiences are kind of like culturally triggered. And now comes this gringo from the other side of the Atlantic and kind of like having the similar experiences, brought me to the conclusion, okay, something is going on in these practices that is directed to sensory manipulation of our bodies. So it's not about spirits are real or not real, but it's like something happens in these practices that can do something with everybody, being part of the cultural context or not. And yeah, long story short, this is kind of like what I'm reflecting on in my article, not giving an answer, but really putting into question, how much can we put our own feelings, experiences into discussion when we talk about efficacy, effectiveness, and what's all about healing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Elmar. And finally, in chapter 11, Channeling an Archangel, an Apprenticeship in Mental-Electronic Life and Healing, Fiona Barry proposes an auto-ethnography exploring different modes of knowledge arising from the engagement as an apprentice in metatronic healing in the UK. Through her method of cognitive empathetic engagement, she shared her experiences of transformation with fellow participants on the pathway, confronting the differences with people in her own country, while maintaining a critical questioning, reflecting upon the conditioning and constraints of Western definitions. And now I ask Roger Canals to join me here. Roger wrote the epilogue of our book from a perspective of a visual anthropologist, which is very interesting, his approach to images. Well, his epilogue is titled Healing Images and Trust.
Thank you. Well, hello to everyone. It's been a privilege and an honor to write the epilogue of this book. And I think it's a very good idea to organize this event because, I mean, we publish, we write, but then think that our work gives birth to a certain community that have a continuity that we can discuss upon texts after they are done. It's an important thing of the academic life. Anyway, my epilogue is called Images, Healing, and Trust. I'm a filmmaker and anthropologist. I work in Afro-American context in Puerto Rico, in Venezuela, also in Barcelona, my native town. And I think that writing this epilogue has been a privilege because it made me think a lot about my own ethnographic and cinematic practice. And I think in a way, in what we are doing every day at every time. And I think it's a very important thing of anthropology of religion and of this book in particular, is that something that is going on in healing rituals when there is this forces, energies that are in movement is something that in a way or another is conveying our day-to-day life when we interact with others. In a way, I see in all articles of this book, this unsatisfaction, this effort to go beyond categories of self and others, of the sacred and the non-sacred, of fixed categories, of representation of reality, and to see this encounter as something much more dynamic, dialogical, the encounter that is taking place in healing rituals. And it makes me think a lot on the cinematic practice, in the sense that what I love about cinematic practice, or doing research cinema, is the fact that you can't get rid of the body so easily. I mean, of course, there's a lot of different ways of filming, but if you're filming someone who's moving, you move with this person. It's the art of imitation in a way. If you're filming someone who's into the water and you want to get a close shot, you have to go into the water. Of course, you can go into the water if you are not filming, and you can film from very far away. But in a way, if you really want to be close to this person, one of the interesting things of the filmic activity is that in a way you become the shadow of the person you are filming, you are with. And you feel, bodily speaking, the kind of movement, the kind of experience that is an analogy between your experience and the experience of the person you are filming. I think that in a way, all articles try to deal with this idea of this kind of shared encounter, of this, what you call this embodied epistemologies, no? Where your body and the other body are not just separated body, but there is a contagion in the positive sense of the word, that you follow up the person and that this sparks your own imagination. I think that the cinema is great for filming rituals because, I mean, cinema can grasp movement, colors, affection, non-verbal language, and these articles are a claim for the importance of all these aspects. But not only cinema is great for filming healing rituals, but, and this is the interesting thing, the act of filming can be seen as a ritual in itself or as part of the ritual itself. And this is, again, an aspect that appears in different chapters of this book, that we are not in a position of distance in relation to what we are studying. It's a position of continuity. We are not studying it, we are transforming it while studying it, because we are not at the distance, we are not at another reality. We are not studying a reality which is opposite to our reality, but we are building up something new in relation with others. And I think that the cinematic image is in a way the index, the trace of this encounter, and it's magic in a way, and it's the magic of the kind of the articles in the book. So you can think on the filming. I don't want to be long. It's just 2 minutes of the filming act as a ritual, not only filming rituals, but the filming as a ritual act, and it made me think a lot on my own personal experiences. For example, now I remember, and I think that I misunderstood because I was too close-minded. Some of the things that happened to me perhaps 20 years ago. No? For example, when I was called in the midst of the Venezuelan forest, and someone told me it's because, I mean, the spirits are just passing through. And I said, no, it's just the wind, you see. And now I think it was, at that moment, I just misregarded this kind of comments. Now I think it's much more interesting to take them as a kind of device for theoretical imagination. Okay, why the cold and the spirits and the death and the ethnographer? Why this comment? This comment was an invitation. The invitation to be in contact, to build something together for mutual understanding. And I said to myself, perhaps too rationally, no, I mean, it's the wind, but they think that it's the spirits. No? I imagine, I mean, I remember myself at that moment. Or for example, I have an article called The Forbidden Shot. When you film a ritual, there are shots that you can't do. You can't do. For example, when filming someone who's in trance, and I was said, don't put yourself just in front of the person, because the person can't see, his or her eyes reflecting on the lens of the camera. Well, that's an interesting thing. Why not? Well, so the thing is that with the way you film is not your own decision, but it's a kind of accommodation. It's a mutual agreement between you and the people with whom you work. So the way you look through the camera, the way you see in general, has something to do with the particular ontology of the ritual you are filming with. And I think that this sensitivity is in a way common to the whole book. And I said, a third stage, not only filming healing rituals, cinema as a kind of ritual in itself, but also the idea that images can heal. This is a strong term. And I remember that it's not my own invention. I mean, someone said it to me. Las imágenes curan, no? Images can heal. I said, well, it's a metaphor. Well, metaphor is not a very good term sometimes. I mean, of course, an altar are images that can heal. But for example, when you film and you make a film, and then the film is screened, and that these images have an effect on the people who see these images, they have an effect, they're performative. And the same goes for the books and for everything we do. It's not just a representation, it's something that transforms reality while representing it. So these are some of the thoughts that this book sparked to me. And I just wanted to add two more comments before concluding. The first one is about writing. There is a concern on writing. Okay, we think that the body is important, that the you and me, so the self and the other, are connected. But how do we transmit it through words? Because words has pronouns. Because words have to put into sentences. Sentences have rules, and these rules have an ideology in themselves. You see what I mean? So how to transform language through language is not that easy, especially in the academia where we are supposed to write in a rather specific way. So there is an attempt for going beyond language through language. And I think that we should even be more in the future, and Emily and I, we have had plenty of talks about that, no? Of the possibilities for an ethnographic writing that account for the importance of the body and affections, perhaps into a multimodal perspective, combining images and text, using participative or collaborative projects, combining images that we make, images that other people make. For example, I have explored sometimes in filming the same ritual, me and other people, and then combining images. Okay, it's just an experiment, but let's experiment, because if you want to transform what we say, we have to transform the way we say it. And finally, the question of trust. Now I'm the PI of an ERC project called Visual Trust. So it's visual trust, and which means how do we interact with and through images in terms of trust and mistrust in science, religion, and in social images. And I think that the question of trust, which will be crucial, I think, tomorrow in a panel, is very, is crucial within this book. I mean, do we trust people when they tell us something? Do they trust us when we say, okay, we are in anthropology, I'm a very good faith, I'm very respectful with you, blah, 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 and then they know that we will publish articles, get positions and all that. And I mean, do we trust the devices we use to undertake an ethnography? I mean, devices means this, but also a camera, for example, or drawing or whatever. So it's not just a matter of being true and false, because it's a matter of trust, in the sense that trust has to do with uncertainty. You trust someone, although you are not totally sure whether this person will do or not do what he or she has promised to do. So in this idea of uncertainty, trusting and the importance of trust as a relational and performative category is more and more important, especially in the context of healing. Healing is an act of trust in a certain way. And so is anthropology as well. Thank you very much.
Here.
I'll stay here.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you for accepting our invitation to write this epilogue for the book and for discussing it here today. And thank you to all the authors. And I'll open the floor for questions, comments. Can you come here for the microphone? Thomas Shordas.
First of all, congratulations to you all for this producing this wonderful volume. I can't wait to use it in teaching my course on meaning and healing, and it's a very exciting thing. Something that I heard makes me want to do a pitch for another book as well. It's one that's been out for a while, but people have been talking about their experiences in the field in relationship to the phenomena that they're studying and the people that they're studying, and having these kind of anomalous experiences that that they're not sure exactly what to do with. And I've heard that a couple of times today. And there's a lovely book edited by Athena McLean and Annette Leibing that some of you may already know. It's called The Shadow Side of Ethnography. And they had the idea of getting people together who have had those kinds of experiences, the kind of experiences that you don't know what to do with and never really appear in the ethnographies. I think they're starting to appear a little bit more, even outside of the rubric of autoethnography. But that's a book that treats them in explicit detail, and I think this whole topic is something that needs to be developed more. And it sounds from what you all have said about this book that you're taking that very seriously and moving it. And so it's great. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And yes, what moved us to start these discussions, I mean, this book comes from a panel, and we had other panels at the CISR and other workshop on the matter, is this need by ethnographers to share and reflect upon these experiences, because most of us used to say at the time, well, we don't know how to treat them, so let's start a discussion about it. Let's start to think how to use them methodologically. How do they inform our ways of knowing, of writing, of relating to others? So how can we treatment? How can we stop bragging them out? How can we put them on the table and look at them and see how, if and how they're useful? So this is what actually triggered our discussion, and I hope that this discussion will be ongoing, will be expanding, will be shared with other authors, and that we will have other publication on the matter, and also that we can share them with our students, for example, because I have many students who come to me and say, well, how can I deal with this phenomena that happened during a ritual? How can I deal with it? Shall I put it in my thesis or shall I leave it out? So this is something that we all hear from our students. So it's time to tackle them, and to tackle them in a critical way, which doesn't mean to criticize them. It means to analyze them. Thank you. Any other comments? Vania Cardoso?
Since Thomas Church has made a pitch for a book that already exists, I'm going to make a pitch for a book that you should put together. And it has to do with something that we, because this book brings up, and many other books have tried in different ways, to talk about, I'm going to call it like our odd experience in the field. Now, odd because it escapes the certain kind of prescribed distance or different experience. But I'm thinking about the kinds of workshops that you have been putting together, the HEAL Network has been putting together, which is to bring interlocutors of your research into the university context to talk to anthropologists. And I think it'd be really interesting to put together their weird experience with us, because I'm thinking about like today, the experience we had today, and then it's like the fourth workshop of having people who we've been doing field work with and are very safely contained out there. And then when we bring them into the university, how uncomfortable it is, you know, it's, I mean, I'm using this word in a very broad sense, but I think it's very interesting to think about not just as what happens when they're here, but also what happens from their perspective, like when we are there. Now, I'm just thinking of, because I know that, for example, in Brazil, there has been an attempt to bring our interlocutors into the university system, but they're being labeled traditional knowledge, you know. And the example we had today, they're very far from traditional knowledge in that sense, because they're also doctors, you know, so they also kind of, the proposal you have made of breaking those barriers or make those limits, I think it would be really interesting to do that in like the book you have now, but from kind of turn it upside down, you know. So.
Thank you, Vanya. This is a wonderful suggestion, so good advice. And I think we also discussed it with Alberto at the time when we did the workshop in Florianopolis to put together a book, not only scholarly authors, but also our interlocutors that join our workshops. So this is definitely a plan for the future. Thank you. Are there any other comments also online? Also from our authors? Cecilia Dreikia.
Sorry, I was very late, so I missed most of the presentation, but the conversation you were having was really stimulating to me. And so I had a question in mind, and then your question really brought it up. So I wanted to ask you and the other authors, because these experiences have often been described as extraordinary experiences. Extraordinary Anthropology is another book that deals with this kind of experiences in the field, etc. And thinking about this, I always think, to what extent are these experiences extraordinary? Because of course, it's a key question. For some people, these are ordinary experiences or not, but are part of ordinary life, for example, for our interlocutors. So when we talk about these experiences as extraordinary, do we take for granted the fact that the ethnographer is a Western person, or a person with a Western education without other kind of forms of knowledges that have shaped his idea or her idea of the world? So I don't know if you had discussion about this, but.
Thank you, Cecilia. Well, yes, we tackled this matter in the introduction, especially criticizing this idea of the extraordinary, and this is shared among the editors of this volume, because well, the proposal was indeed to decondition our bodies, decondition from our academic knowledge, reflect upon this conditioning and deconditioning, and especially recognizing, acknowledging that these experiences are ordinary for most of the people that we do research with, and suddenly they can become ordinary also for us, because after 20 years in the field, in the Valle do Amanhecer, for me it's something very ordinary to see someone possessed. So this kind of dichotomy, ordinary, extraordinary, doesn't work anymore at that point. If you have some questions or comments online, please, Elmar, you can come.
Yes, yes, thank you for the last question, because I mean, this goes already beyond our ethnographers' experience. But it's something that I observe all the time when we talk about ordinary or extraordinary experience, or let's say normal or abnormal experience or behavior. Whereas many behaviors, many experiences in the mental health care sector would be deemed abnormal, psychiatric, diagnosed. In the spiritual field, they receive an explanation. They receive a model, an explanation model. Why is that? And they receive agency how to deal with that. You know, so and on top, I mean, in terms of mediumship, something that maybe in the Western psychiatric culture would be deemed as pathological, there becomes something valuable. As a medium, I can help other people again, you know. So I find this discussion very interesting when we talk about ordinary or extraordinary experiences, how certain spiritual approaches take people out of the abnormal field and provide space for agency and how to deal with the experiences in productive ways. I just wanted to add up on the last comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Elmar. Thank you all. I think I hope that this discussion will continue and will foster other meetings, other publications, and I'm looking forward to knowing if you have any other publication on the matter. So thank you all for being here. And just to remind you that Berghahn has a discount code for the hardback edition that is valid until the end of the month. So you all have the leaflets, and we circulated the leaflets to participants, and it's on the Hill Network website. Tomorrow we will have other panels dealing with trust, with healing cooperation. We will have a workshop, visual ethnography workshop, visual approaches to healing cooperation with Erminia Colucci's film Harmony Healing Together, discussed by Roger Canals, and then Roger is also leading a visual ethnography lab on filming the invisible on Friday. So thank you all for being with us, and thank you to the authors. Hope to see you soon in person. Thank you.